The last day of the Ministerial Institute in Battle Creek, Michigan was January 3, 1875. Ellen White was ill. In fact, they thought she should be in the sanitarium because they were afraid that her bad cold would turn into pneumonia. But James White didn't want her to go to the sanitarium. He wanted the people at the Ministerial Institute to be able to hear her. And so he called several of the ministers, leading ministers, to their home to pray for Ellen White. And they did pray, and she was given a vision, and she was healed. They later went to the meeting. They went to the dedication of the Battle Creek College the next day. When she came out of that vision on the evening of the 3rd, though, he asked her if she wanted to tell what she'd been shown. She said, no, not right now. But sometime either the next day or a few days later, we're not quite sure when, she began to share a little bit about the fact that she had been shown publishing houses around the world and the mission work growing. And her husband said, do you remember any of the countries? And she said, no, I don't. Oh yes, she said, I do remember. The angel said, Australia. So 10 years later, Elder Haskell, S.N. Haskell, decided to go help fulfill that part of the vision. And he went as our first missionary, one of our first missionaries to Australia. Now, the interesting thing about that vision, even more so than the angel said Australia, was that 10 years later, Ellen White was called to Europe as a missionary. And she lived in Europe from 1885 to 1887. And most of that time, her headquarters was in Switzerland, though she traveled around to several other countries while she was there. But when she first got to Basel, to where our headquarters of our work was in Europe at that time, Basel, Switzerland, why, they wanted to give her a tour of the building. And so they took her to the printing facility. And she came into the room and she looked around and she said, I think I've been here before. Well, of course, she had never been there before. She'd just arrived. And there were a couple of young men working there running the presses. And she said, where's the older man? And they kind of looked surprised. As I say, this was her first visit. And they said, oh, the older man, the foreman, he's gone into town on business. Well, she had a message for him. And it was a message that had been given to her 10 years before, on January 3, 1875. Well, sometime later, while she was in Europe, she was in Christiania, today Oslo, Norway. And we had a publishing house then in what's now Oslo. And again, she felt like she had been there before, and she had some counsel. And it was counsel that she had first seen in the vision of 1875. Then, a few years after that, she was in Australia. She arrived in Australia in 1891. And after a short span of time getting there and all, why, they took her to the publishing house in Melbourne. And once again, she said she'd seen these presses. And once again, it was from that same vision in 1875. And she had some counsel for them that had been given to her now 16 or so years before. So when God speaks to a prophet, sometimes it's counsels on things that have happened in the past so we can learn lessons. Sometimes it's for things that are going on right now so we can have counsel on how to do things better. And once in a while, it's like this vision, the counsel is given way in advance. And we then, when we hear about the stories, we can know that God is actually speaking through this prophet because of the miraculous way the messages have come.